Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to this August 6th, 2014 edition of Nightcast. Our opening story tonight comes from the World Health Organization, which is beginning a 2-day emergency meeting to discuss new measures to tackle the Ebola crisis. Nick Childs has our opening report, in which you'll hear how the British Airways has suspended flights to Liberia and Sierra Leone because of the virus.
They've stepped up airport health checks in Nigeria as international alarm grows over the worst outbreak of the deadly Ebola virus since it was discovered nearly 4 decades ago. With concern that this health crisis is spinning out of control, the World Health Organization is holding an emergency meeting. It could declare a global health emergency, imposing travel bans and border controls on affected countries. But some say more should have been done earlier.
On several occasions we have repeated that the epidemic is far from being controlled, and I think today, unfortunately, we are very far from controlling it.
This most deadly Ebola outbreak has so far affected 4 countries in West Africa: Guinea, Sierra Leone, Liberia and now Nigeria. The death rate from the current outbreak is estimated at 50 to 60%. Almost 900 people have died.
Let me welcome the delegations from Sierra Leone, Liberia and Guinea, with whom we are working so urgently to control the Ebola outbreak and whose citizens are in our thoughts and prayers today.
As President Obama hosted African leaders in Washington, both the American aid workers who contracted Ebola in Liberia have now flown home. A Spanish priest in Liberia has also now tested positive. But the Americans have been improving. They've received an experimental drug.
The company is trying to scale up on the production. It's difficult to produce these particular types of antibody cocktails, and it's not at the level of being able to mass produce.
British Airways has said it's suspending its flights to and from Sierra Leone and Liberia for the rest of this month. In Europe and the United States, the authorities and airlines are monitoring this outbreak closely. The risk of transmission here is said to be very low. And Ebola is containable, but the countries currently affected urgently need more outside help to prevent this becoming an even bigger crisis in the region. Nick Childs, BBC News.
Friends, I apologize. I'm trying out a new microphone tonight, and I got the buttons mixed up, and instead of turning off my mic, I turned on another one and had them both on during that news story, so hope we didn't ruin that one too bad. We go to Russia next. And by the way, I noticed during that story they did not mention. I said they'd mention it in the video. It's just only in my head notes here that the British Airways they were when the video was released, they were talking about suspending flights. By the time we came on the air tonight, my update lead-in says British Airways has in fact suspended flights to Liberia and Sierra Leone, and I think you may have heard, I've got some notes here that say the disease for which there is no vaccine and no cure, although they're testing some things in the United States. The virus, the disease, has claimed more than 800 lives since the current outbreak began in February. That virus very much relates to the 4th seal of Revelation 6, which is depicted there as a pale horse with a rider whose name is Death. Alongside, Revelation 6 says, rides Hades, hell, the grave. And Jesus Christ described the primary activity of this pale horse and its rider named Death as loimus, meaning disease epidemics, pestilence, the plagues of Egypt. He also included between the 3rd and 5th seal seismic activity. We reported a big earthquake in China a couple of days ago that killed nearly 400 people. They may have found more by now. It may be up to 400 or even more who have been found dead by that 6.1 magnitude earthquake in China. And although there haven't been a lot of death from them, you check the earthquake websites, there are many of them. You'll see since the 6.1 magnitude quake in China, there have just been scores of other 6.1 and greater earthquakes, some 6.8 and various magnitudes all around the globe in the past 3 days, just scores and scores of them. And of course that happens every day. There's an earthquake somewhere. So we are under the situation Jesus Christ described in plain language of earthquakes in diverse or different places, just all over the place. And then there's one other thing in that fourth seal. Christ mentioned tarak, trouble. Not the major trouble, not the mega trouble of the great tribulation of the fifth seal, the next major events happen in prophecy, but trouble, which is described in the Greek English lexicons as troubled waters, either literally or figuratively, and figuratively they add that it means mobs and seditions, which the world is just rampant with now. Now, in our next story, we are going over to Russia, where Putin is hitting the United States and the EU with sanctions. Russia is placing sanctions on the U.S. and the EU on food exports. President Vladimir Putin has banned or curbed agricultural imports from countries imposing sanctions on Russia over the crisis in Ukraine. You'll hear in this report how in a decree that Putin ordered, the measures which also apply to food imports are to be introduced for 1 year. Daniel Sanford, standing by, reports from Moscow.
When the European Union and America introduced much stronger sanctions last week, many of us warned that President Putin may not comply with their demands, but might rather increase the stakes. And that seems to have been exactly what has happened. He had a big meeting today. A decision was made to introduce sanctions against countries that introduced sanctions against Russia. And that seems to be a ban on all food imports from the United States and a ban on the imports of fruit and vegetables from the European Union. That shouldn't affect British producers too much. It's not a major market for them, but it will affect producers in places like Holland and certainly producers in Eastern Europe. For example, Poland will suffer quite badly, I think, from a further reduction in their exports to Russia. So it will have some effects overseas. It will also have effects here, though, of course. Russia's restless middle classes are quite used to their European luxury foods, and I think they will not like the fact that those are coming off the shelves. And perhaps more significantly, because the Kremlin's probably given up on the middle classes, but perhaps more significantly, we could see price rises in foodstuffs right across Russia. The Kremlin's trying to deal with that by increasing imports from Latin America, for example, trying to wake up local producers. But the creaking system will struggle, I think, to deal with that. So it could cause problems and certainly price rises. And of course, this isn't likely to be the end of all this. There are discussions going on in the Kremlin about the possibility of banning European flights from flying over Russia on their way to Asia. So that, if that goes ahead, will be very significant. And NATO warned today 20,000 troops again on the border with Ukraine. So there are plenty of opportunities for further escalation if President Putin chooses to go down that path.
Friends, people in the Iraqi desert have long been dependent on the Tigris River and the Euphrates rivers. But there are fears that ISIS militants could take control of the country's dams and use them to inflict drought or flooding on communities who live alongside them. You know, as Mr. Armstrong has pointed out, Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong, I'm referring to, one of God's apostles for these end days, a watchman that warned us of things to come and also announced the good news of the kingdom of God to come in the future, but warned us how if we fail to obey our God, we will be subject to the penalties and punishments that God will inflict upon the world, and that He will allow in some cases just to happen naturally, because a lot of the conditions that affect weather and weather patterns and so on produce tornadoes and hurricanes that in the past God has held back as a blessing to protect the people to whom he gave various borders, lands, and their borders. But in this next report, we'll see how one of the things Mr. Armstrong mentioned regarding the third seal of Revelation, the black horse of famine, as Jesus Christ described it in plain language, famine. Mr. Herbert Armstrong pointed out that famine is often the result of the second seal, war and rumors of war. War, not necessarily the rumors, but war that are at the hand of men against other men will sometimes cause drought. Flooding is just the opposite of drought, and yet it accomplishes the same goal, because let me put that chart back up, that third seal, that black horse of famine, relates to a scarcity of food, and scarcity of food can be introduced either by drought, where the ground becomes baked dry, or where the ground becomes flooded, and the seeds that were producing fruit and growing just are killed by an excess of water. So it can have the same result of producing famine, whether it be drought or flooding. This next story I just introduced to you is regarding a combination of drought and flooding for peoples who live alongside those two rivers I mentioned. The BBC's Hiyar Gold has this report.
The two legendary rivers in the Mesopotamia, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. For thousands of years, this water has given life to the people and villages in the Iraqi desert.
We are on the bank of Euphrates River. We have been advised do not go further, because just a few kilometers away from here there is fighting between Iraqi army and ISIS Sunni militants.
Abu Khudair has lived beside Euphrates his entire life. He never stays far from the river.
This water is very important to us. It's a main river. We use it for fishing, farming and drinking water. We can't live without it.
This side of the river is Musayyib, a Shia community, only an hour's drive south of Baghdad. Now, with ISIS advancing, they're at risk. The Sunni extremist militants see the Shia as their arch enemy.
We are armed. If they come, we are ready.
Many here fear they might be ISIS's next target. The Tigris is also key to battle strategy. This river sneaks through many small and large cities, supplying water to the capital city of Baghdad. The two rivers' numerous dams control the flow of the region's water. In the past weeks, ISIS have captured many towns upstream, waging war for control of the dams. Many fear ISIS could turn the dams into weapons, drying out the rivers or flooding the cities.
They could sink an entire city. Almost 2 months ago, ISIS opened the Fallujah Dam. The city of Abu Ghraib near Baghdad went underwater. It's dangerous. The capital could be next.
Throughout history, these two rivers have been the lifeblood of the Mesopotamia. With the fight continuing between the Sunni militants and the Iraqi army, their water may turn into a lethal weapon against those who live along the rivers. Hiyar Gold, BBC News, Baghdad.
Okay, friends, now I got to watch this mic level because I just made a little bit of an adjustment. I think maybe... Let me check this mic. Whoops, let's see. I guess I knocked it right out on that one. Okay, we'll have to get that back up to right there, I guess. Okay, all right, I am wanting to test the microphone. It's one I've had. It's one that NPR people use. I just want to check it against the mic that we have normally been using. Okay, looks like we got the level back where it should be. Steve Rosenberg, BBC Steve Rosenberg reports next, friends, from Russia, from the Russian border with Ukraine, on the 483 Ukrainian soldiers who have retreated to Russia because they're under intense pressure. Despite strained relations between the two countries, the servicemen have been allowed to enter and have been provided with food and shelter.
Well, together with some other journalists, I'm travelling through southern Russia towards the border with Ukraine. We've got a military escort in front. That's because this trip has been organised by the Defence Ministry. And that is because during the night, 438 Ukrainian servicemen crossed the border with Russia and have asked for refuge here. And we're being taken to meet some of them. As we approach our destination, security is tight. There have been battles near here, just across the border. This is Gulkova, right on the border with Ukraine, and this is the field camp which the Russians have set up for those 438 Ukrainian servicemen who came across the border and took refuge here. They say that there was fierce fighting going on between the Ukrainian army and militants, and they had no choice but to come here. This is Ukraine's 72nd Brigade. Not everyone here wanted to talk to us about what had happened. Those who did told us they'd been under intense pressure. With no ammunition left and no backup, they'd retreated to Russia. Despite strained relations between the two countries, they'd been allowed in and given food and accommodation. If they want to go back to Ukraine, they can, the Russian security official says, or they can apply to remain in Russia. We didn't find anyone here who was keen to stay. Ukraine is my home, he says. It's where I was born and where I belong. Across camp, Yuri blames Russia for stoking the violence in Ukraine. Our nations should be friends, Yuri says. It's just that politics gets in the way. Russia claims its actions here were humanitarian. But Ukraine continues to believe that this is a conflict which Moscow is fueling. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, in Gulkova, southern Russia.
Friends, we've been talking about how it was exactly 100 years ago that World War I broke out in 1914. And at this point today, we're at about 30 hours into World War I, at least as far as Britain's involvement in it goes. And in this next story, Britain had a big warship that was sunk just 30 hours into Britain's involvement in World War I. She was the pride of Pembroke Dock, but her crew became the first Royal Navy casualties of World War I. Exactly 100 years ago tonight during our live broadcast, friends, HMS Amphion hit a German mine and sank with the loss of 151 lives. Sailors from Pembrokeshire were among those who died. The ship was the first British warship destroyed in the conflict, and, as Carwyn Jones reports, her loss sent shockwaves throughout the country.
In 1914, Pembroke Dock was at the cutting edge of shipbuilding, producing huge vessels in large numbers. The scout cruiser HMS Amphion was at the forefront of that technology. When war was declared, she set sail for the North Sea. It was to be her final voyage.
Her role was to lead flotillas of destroyers from the Harwich station in East Anglia The Germans had decided to offensively mine the coast from the Thames estuary northwards.
On the 5th of August 1914, HMS Amphion and 2 destroyers in her flotilla attacked and sunk the Königin Louise, a German mine layer. As Amphion returned to port the following morning on August the 6th, she hit one of those mines. Within minutes, she'd struck another one, causing a major explosion. Debris flew everywhere. The ship began to disintegrate. Within minutes, it was gone. The war was barely 30 hours old, but already 151 men were dead. The crew of HMS Amphion were the first Royal Navy casualties of World War I. The news hit Pembrokeshire hard. 2 local men lost their lives on Amphion, and in the dockyards where she'd been built, there was disbelief.
Every ship that was built here, the dockyard workers had tremendous pride in their work and the construction. And when news came through to Pembroke Dock that HMS Amphion, a scout cruiser, had been lost, there was tremendous shock and mourning in the town.
During the First World War, Pembroke Dock lost 6 of its warships due to enemy action, with a total loss of 1,200 lives. But Amphion still casts a long shadow here. In 100 years of shipbuilding, she was the first of its vessels destroyed in action. Today, she lies on the bed of the North Sea, a protected war grave, the first Royal Navy vessel lost in World War I.
Friends of Truce appears to be holding in Gaza, the longest lull in fighting since the conflict began on July 8th. The BBC's John Donaldson reports from Gaza City as Israeli and Palestinian representatives begin talks in Cairo.
Gaza has come back to life. The streets are busy as people stock up on supplies, hoping this 3-day truce will hold.
The ceasefire is good. We have come out to get food and water, to let the children go out. We don't have water. We don't have electricity.
Some areas have been flattened. Hundreds of thousands have been displaced. Many no longer have homes to go to. UN school shelters are packed with desperate people.
My home was destroyed. I have no place now. I will not leave here, the UN school, until they find me a place to live.
The UN says more than 1,800 Palestinians have been killed, the majority of them civilians, 400 of them children. Palestinians are still burying the dead.
This is a funeral for a senior Islamic Jihad commander. Gunmen are firing into the air. There may well be a ceasefire in place, but there's still a lot of anger, still a lot of ill feeling.
This does not feel like peace. But the US Secretary of State, John Kerry, told the BBC he saw this as an opportunity.
I even believe that this situation now that has evolved perhaps will concentrate people's minds on the need to get back to the broader negotiations and try to resolve the issues of the 2 states.
Most in Gaza and Israel think Mr. Kerry is dreaming. Israel's troops have withdrawn to the border, but this ceasefire will only ever be a short-term fix. This is unlikely to be the last war in Gaza. John Donison, BBC News, Gaza City.
And friends, as we played a report by Dennis Prager the other night, that I appreciate again one of our special viewers providing a link to that for us. We got it, we played it, you heard, and I'll have some slides from that. I'll just show a couple of quick summary points from that before we sign off tonight, because Mr. Prager hit it in a nutshell as to what the real problem of resolving the issue is, or what the issue is, and why it's therefore difficult to resolve, and we'll get to that in a moment. I have one more video related to Israel and Gaza and this thing going on over there. Israel says it achieved its goal in Gaza of getting quiet and security for its people. And you heard how in that previous report that both sides have people in Cairo now, and negotiations are underway there in the Egyptian capital to try and ensure a longer-lasting ceasefire after the current one expires. However, many Israelis living near the border with Gaza see future conflict as inevitable. Wire Davies reports from the border of Israel and Gaza on how Israelis see the prospects for peace.
2 weeks ago, Mariah Ashkenazi lost her husband of 10 years. Her 2-month-old daughter will never see her father again, and her 2 sons fantasize about becoming superheroes so they can bring their dad back. 36-year-old Yair, a solicitor and army reservist, was killed in a firefight with Hamas militants just inside Gaza.
I had very mixed feelings. I didn't want him to go in there, but I eventually understood there was no other way for the sake of our country. Because if we don't protect ourselves, we are doomed.
The sense of vulnerability is felt most acutely in Israeli communities near Gaza, where there's been a human and economic cost.
They should have been picked.
Here at Kibbutz Nativ HaAsara, crops have been lost and residents have fled.
We can't let them win. So we are staying here. We are staying here with the fears and with the stress and with the children that know how to go to a shelter when they are 3 years old.
This is the 4th war that Israel has fought over Gaza in the space of less than 10 years. And while these Israeli communities right up against the Gaza border largely support their government's actions, they fully expect there will be another war in 2 or 3 years' time, because the fundamental problems behind the crisis are not being addressed. While talks in Egypt aim to extend the 3-day ceasefire, Israel's overwhelming firepower has been pulled back from Gaza. But it's in no position to claim a victory, says one of the government's biggest critics.
As long as the siege on Gaza will continue, as long as life in Gaza will be life in a cage, Israel's life will not be secure. This is a very basic formula.
This evening, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke for the first time since the ceasefire was announced.
Israel deeply regrets every civilian casualty, every single one. We do not target them. We do not seek them. The people of Gaza are not our enemy.
Mariah Ashkenazi has no desire for her children to follow their father's path and fight in Gaza, but it's something she knows might be inevitable. Winner Davis, BBC News, Israel.
Minutes before the 72-hour ceasefire began, there's a rocket that was fired from deep within a civilian zone. As reporter, an Indian reporter, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce his name. As that reporter from India notes, a suspicious blue tent was erected in the middle of a dense urban area yesterday afternoon, or I'm sorry, today's Wednesday, Monday afternoon, that would have been 2 days ago, on the very doorstep of Juan's hotel, the reporter's hotel, and a trio of men moved in and out of the tent, that little blue tent you see on your screen right there now, carrying supplies. I'll show you some video of this in just a moment. Jain believes, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, it's spelled Jain. He believes the tent was used to hide rocket construction, and you'll see some of that going on in the video, and you'll see another slide I have for you in a moment that shows what appeared there after that tent had been there for some minutes or hours. A big rocket launcher was found in that exact spot right there, and we've got pictures of that to show you here in just a moment. But the tent's use as a rocket building site establishes something which Hamas has always been accused of, that they actually use densely populated civilian areas to fire their rockets from. as Jane says. You'll see that this is an area that is very heavily built up. A lot of residential and hotel buildings all around it. If Hamas does fire a rocket from there, Wayne said, it will have immediate consequences for everyone around there, or at least so he thought. On Tuesday morning, yesterday morning, as you'll see in a video we're going to play in just a moment, a rocket was fired from the exact same spot there. And Juan and his camera crew, they go in this video to investigate, but they keep a safe distance. Because they were concerned about the possibility of an Israeli counterstrike that rendered that whole area around Jane's hotel dangerous. I think, do I have the video next, friends? No, let me show you these couple of slides close up. Here's a slide that shows the reporter right next to a cannon launcher that was found in that area where that tent was. And behind that, in the building behind it, if you look to the left side, top of the building, there's a blue UN flag. That's the UN building right there, right within sight of that rocket launcher. Let me pull out here for a moment. Let me change that slide to a close-up shot. Here's a close-up. You can see on the left side of your screen, you see the cannon launcher there in the foreground of the picture, and then just to the right of that, right behind it, you can see the flag on the top of the UN building there in Gaza. So that rocket launcher was built in that little blue tent you see right there in front of that UN building, and Wayne saw them constructing it, as you'll see in this video we're about to show you. He saw the little blue tent, and then later this rocket launcher appears there, and then the next day a rocket is fired off in the air from there. You'll see all this in the video. The TV team that provided this video reportedly waited until they had left Gaza before they posted this report and this video, potentially fearing retaliation from Hamas. The video comes on the heels of a report from the Iraqi forces, from the Israel Defense Forces, the IDF, that a captured Hamas urban warfare manual may tout the benefits of human shields. Let's see, now is this the video? Let's see, let me bring this forward. Let's see if this is going to play, or is this just another slide I have? Okay, that's just another slide. That slide shows you see all the smoke from the rocket being launched right there from that area. And now let's go to the video where the reporter from India, right inside his hotel room, they zoom down on this little tent being constructed. Or right after it's constructed, you can see the men moving around inside there building this rocket launcher.
Okay, so we're witnessing something very, very unusual in this plot of land, abandoned plot of land right next to our hotel. A blue tent has come up. It wasn't there last night. It came up just this morning, and there have been two men moving in and out of it. Now, by reasonable doubt, it's fair to guess that this is a potential Hamas rocket launching site that's being set up. There's always been this question of how Hamas manages to fire its rockets without being detected by the Israelis. This perhaps is one of the ways of assembling it under a tent. It also establishes something which Hamas has always been accused of, that they actually use densely populated civilian areas to fire their rockets. And if the camera zooms out a little more, you'll see that this is an area very heavily built up, a lot of residential and hotel buildings all around. And so if Hamas does fire a rocket from here, it will have immediate consequences for everyone around here. And I also must report at this point that the first night when we came here, we did see, or rather hear, a rocket go off exactly at that plot of land, and the hotel and the hotels opposite us were evacuated because the Israelis sent a warning that there might be a strike on them. That didn't happen, but if Hamas uses this site once again to launch a rocket, we're not sure what's going to happen. So now, as you can see, the tent has been removed. Whatever they were doing under the tent is clearly over. We also find that there are not two people, two individuals, but three who are behind this particular activity, and they've placed a sort of a bush on top of whatever they've buried under the sand, and also they're using a spade to cover it up with mud, and it looks like they're prepared to leave. But of course, during this whole process, they were running some cables out from under the tent to somewhere at the back, and it now remains to be seen whether, if this is indeed a Hamas rocket launch site, that they're going to use it to detonate it remotely. We can see one of the men leaving. He's got something on his head. He just looks like he's coming out either onto the road or he's gone behind the tree there. The other guy is standing behind the tree. Again, as I said, this is a very, very unusual sight to actually witness in Gaza, the possibility that we're seeing Hamas setting up for a rocket launch just meters away from our hotel, and again, as I point out, bang in the middle of what is a residential area full of hotels and apartment buildings.
So that's the rocket being fired today morning, a day after it was assembled at the exact spot the rocket has been fired. That's the smoke. We just shot a video of it in the immediate aftermath.
Okay, so we're heading to the spot where we saw the rocket from being fired. It seems to be in an open plot of land, but we're being asked by people not to go to the location, so we're just pulling back, and we're just heading back because some journalists there, as you can see, have waved to us saying not to go there. Okay, so we're not actually going in there because it's been rightly pointed out to us that there could be an immediate Israeli retaliation to the rocket that was fired from here. But as we've reported, or as we managed to capture on camera earlier, we actually saw that particular rocket silo being placed. But reporting it while we're here in Gaza also has serious security implications for both those around here and also for us, which is why this report might actually have to air earlier. But you can see very clearly this is a very, very dense residential and commercial area, and therefore firing the rocket from here will obviously have serious consequences for those who live here should Israel choose to retaliate. In Gaza, with camera person Sanjay Mandal and Neha Masi, Srinivasan Jain for NDTV.
Friends, that was exclusive video by NDTV of India. We appreciate that. That video is on YouTube, and there is also a similar video that was produced by France 24 on the France 24 website. I wasn't able to get a license to show the France 24 video footage of essentially the same thing. But if you want to see that, you can look up their website, go have a look. That's another report that substantiates the fact that Hamas builds rocket launchers and launches rockets from right in the vicinity of a UN building. And of course, to attract an Israeli counterattack, and then they can whoop and holler about how the Israelis are killing civilians. Let me read you this lead-in report I have from this. This is all we have for tonight. Let me just, I think there's something in here that may be worthwhile. France 24 also has exclusive footage of a Hamas rocket launching pad that appears to prove the militant group has been firing from areas heavily populated with civilians. The France 24 correspondent Gallagher Fenwick said the site in Gaza City is some 50 meters only from a hotel where the majority of international media is staying, and just 100 meters from a UN building. The reporter says this type of setup is at the heart of the debate, says Gallagher. The Israeli army has repeatedly accused the Palestinian militants of shooting from within densely populated civilian areas, and that is precisely the type of setup that they had there. The launching pad is also where the France 24 team had a close call last week. During a live cross to the Paris studio, a rocket was fired overhead, forcing Gallagher and his crew to take cover. Friends, I believe that's all we have for you tonight. I'm just scanning ahead. Oh, I do want to show you real quickly, though, a couple of slides we have. I told you I'd show you some slides from the Dennis Prager report that we featured the other night here. One of the slides from that report shows the Hamas motto, which says, "We love death as much as the Jews love life." As much as the Jews love life, Hamas loves death. And then another slide that, as we pointed out, as Dennis Prager pointed out, sums up the issue between Hamas, the Arabs that hate the Jews. It just sums it up in this way, and that is that Hamas, many of the descendants of Ishmael, they want Israel dead. And he had one more slide from his course, spells it out with text, saying it's a simple problem to describe. One side wants the other side dead. Friends, I do have one more video. We're going a little longer tonight, but I've got one more video since this week relates to I showed you the battleship being attacked. Well, let's end with something light here tonight, friends. There's from Australia. There was a man who got his leg stuck in between a train and the dock, and his fellow passengers. You know, once in a while there's something kind of light and nice in the news, and when there is, by all means, let's show it. When this train pulled up at a subway, this man stepping in, you'll see him try to step. He got his foot hung down there. His fellow, they've had some closed circuit television that shows the man going in, his foot getting stuck down in there, and a whole bunch of passengers come up. You'll see here the BBC's Adnan Nawaz spoke to David Himes, a spokesman for Transperth, the subway train operating people, about the dramatic rescue, and you'll hear about it in this video.
Well, first of all, the moment that the man slips, you see there he is trying to get onto the train, and his leg gets caught between the train and the platform, and then people start to come to the side of the train, and essentially you can see that they're trying to tilt it, because just the little gap that there is, if it's widened a little bit, they think that he'll be able to free himself, and he does. It was 5 centimetres the gap. They managed to tilt the train enough, and he wasn't seriously injured at all. Quite incredible. It was people power, essentially, that saved this chap. Let's get some reaction to this. On the line from Perth, David Hines, spokesman for Transperth. David, the first question is, were these people asked to tilt the train, or did they just decide that that would be the best way to proceed and then other people joined in?
No, we believe that it was our people on the ground, our station attendants, who, first of all, when they realised the man, and they were right on the spot, when they realised the man was stuck, alerted the train driver to keep the train stationary and not move off, and then went to his assistance and spent probably 5 or 6 minutes trying to extract him. Weren't able to do that, and then one of them actually, they started getting creative. One of them actually went inside the train and asked the passengers who were still on board, and most of them were still on board at that stage, to move to the other side of the carriage, if you like sort of racing yachts do, get everyone to go on one side and lean out to see if that would tilt the train, just to slightly increase that, as you said, 5 centimetre gap between the train and the platform. That didn't work, so they then got the people to disembark from all the carriages, and it was a 6-car train, so there was quite a few people, and lined them up and started the push. And you can see when you watch the video that there was, it sort of seemed to be a little bit disorganised to start with, and I think they were aware of the possibility that if they pushed and the train rocked back, it would further squash the guy's legs. So one of them then clearly sort of says, no, hang on a tick, we'll all coordinate this. 1, 2, 3, push. They push, and as you said, the bloke gets out. And what you haven't seen, we've seen further vision from inside the train. He just, as soon as the gap opens up, he just jumps, springs to his feet, and walks off. So it really was a very happy outcome for all concerned.
Friends, that's it for our Wednesday night report on Nightcast. God willing, and the creek don't rise. We'll be back again tomorrow night, Thursday evening, with the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. Thanks for joining me tonight. Until next time, this is your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying good night, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.